The wind moves first, slow, granular, and patient. It drifts between hollow towers whose edges no longer know their names. Once this was a city of upward light. Now its glow is a faint mirage rising from quartz dust. Morning does not arrive with sound, but with temperature, a shy gold trembling over the fractured glass of what was once Manhattan. There are no sirens, no footsteps, only a rhythm of settling particles, the whisper of time folding inward. You could almost mistake it for peace, if you did not know it was memory breathing. Evidence suggests that after humanity vanished, sea levels fell again as ice reclaimed the poles. The Atlantic retreated, bearing coastlines buried for ages beneath silt and steel. The island that used to host 8 million lives is now a desert plateau framed by fossilized bridges. Sand covers asphalt in slow waves. Each dune marks another decade of forgetting. Wind pressure alone has replaced every demolition crew. In silence, erosion became the final architect. Steel oxidized into ochre ribbons, weaving patterns across the skyline's bones. Some beams fused under ancient storms, forming crystalline arches that catch dawn like stained glass. The physics of corrosion created accidental art, though no one remains to witness it. Researchers from an imagined future post-human, perhaps silicon, born might one day read these rust hieroglyphs and ask what story the iron was trying to tell. They will find no words, only alignment, a language written in decay. Beneath the surface, sediments preserve the city's organs. Subway tunnels collapsed and filled with mineral fog. Microbes metabolized copper, leaving turquoise veins through the stone-like arteries of forgotten light. Somewhere under the former East River lies a train frozen mid-journey, its frame intact but its meaning dissolved. The chemistry of loss is precise. Oxygen, time, and the gentle insistence of dust. It is difficult to imagine that every human sound once converged here, the laughter, the engines, the unending hum of need. Now the loudest note is wind crossing an empty scaffold. Yet in that hush, there is a different kind of language, the earth remembering itself. What we called ruin, the planet calls renewal. Even silence, stretched over millennia, begins to pulse like breath. If you close your eyes, you might feel the echo of footsteps beneath the sand ghost vibrations carried through quartz. Perhaps they are yours, or perhaps they belong to the species that will come after, listening to the same stillness and wondering who built the first horizon. The sea did not disappear all at once. It whispered its retreat like a tide remembering a promise. Every century, the waterline sank by a breath, revealing old piers and drowned avenues. The Atlantic became a ghostly plain of salt crystals, rippling with mirage. Once it had mirrored skyscrapers. Now it reflects only sky. In the hollows where ferries once passed, wind gathers in circular eddies, carving new languages into the sand. The world has exchanged its blue for a quiet amber, and no one argues with the silence. Sediment cores suggest this transformation took hundreds of thousands of years. As polar ice sheets rebuilt themselves, global circulation slowed. The warm conveyor that once wrapped the planet like a pulse faded into dormancy. In its absence, rain wandered elsewhere, leaving the eastern seaboard arid and breathless. Coral skeletons turned to limestone, and the silt beneath them hardened into a crust of ancient plastic and microglass. What humans had called pollution became geology, sealed into the planet's future script. There are patterns still visible from orbit, rectilinear shadows of harbors, fossilized docks, the geometry of trade. Even from that height, The shape of civilization lingers like handwriting pressed into stone. Future archaeologists, organic or not, might trace these lines the way one studies the vascular map of a leaf. They might notice how beauty once followed utility, how need once built empires. Then, quietly, they might realize that the ocean was not lost, merely translated into time. At night, the desert hums faintly. The grains resonate with residual salts. Moisture condenses in brief glimmers, then vanishes before dawn. Within that rhythm, a memory endures the sound of waves meeting steel, the sigh of ships exhaling diesel and dream. The physics of absence becomes its own music. Somewhere in that stillness, the world remembers motion. You can almost hear it if you listen without expectation. The sea's last lullaby, wrapped inside the dunes. It is neither mournful nor angry. It is patient. Water has never truly left. It is only sleeping deeper, folded beneath ice, waiting for the sun's next persuasion. When it wakes again, these sands will become deltas, and the fossils of bridges will taste the sea once more. Everything recurs, not as punishment, but as rhythm. If you ever stood by an ocean and felt small, that feeling still exists here unchanged, only quieter. The horizon remains endless. The wind still carries salt. Time, too, has a tide, and you are drifting within it, safe in its pull. Wind moves through what was once a grid. The city's pattern avenues, crosswalks, intersections has not vanished entirely. It lingers like a scar beneath the sand. Each gust redraws the map, reshaping memory grain by grain. What were once traffic lights now stand as slender obelisks of corroded glass, their colors long dissolved. Beneath them, dunes breathe softly, rising and collapsing in the rhythm of forgotten footsteps. This place that once inhaled exhaust and electricity now exhales silence. It is strange how peace can feel like the echo of chaos. Studies of Aeolian drift suggest that these dunes migrate at nearly 1 meter per year. Over epochs, their motion mimics the flow of human crowds, restless, forward then gone. Beneath several meters of sediment, scientists of the far future may uncover fragments of pavement fused with basalt. The bitumen that once sealed our roads will have transformed into glossy shale. In those layers, even the faint imprint of a shoe sole might remain, compressed like a thought that refused to fade. The sand itself is a historian. It holds microscopic traces of glass, concrete, and pollen urban fossils. Mixed within are particles of copper from wires, carbon from tires, calcium from bone dust. Together they create a subtle luminescence under twilight, a glow faint enough to resemble memory. When the wind stirs, the desert shimmers as if the city still breathes beneath its surface. Some nights, distant lightning paints the horizon, and for a heartbeat, the ghost of the skyline returns. It's easy to imagine the sounds that once lived here, the whisper of trains below, the rush of air between towers, the heartbeat of millions. Now the same air passes through absence, producing low tones that resemble voices. Perhaps the planet is still trying to speak to itself. Or perhaps this resonance is just physics, a reminder that even silence needs structure to exist. If you stood here now, you might feel a pulse underfoot, like a dream replaying itself. Every grain around you was once part of something named, built, loved. The wind does not erase, it translates. Over time it has written poetry across the ruins, a language without vowels but full of meaning. You would not read it with your eyes, but with your breath. Inhale, and you can almost taste the centuries. Exhale, and you join them. Nothing here truly ends. The sand moves, the earth remembers, and even your quiet curiosity becomes part of its ongoing story. From a distance, the horizon still rises. The skeletal towers of old New York lean like cliffs in a petrified sea, their edges worn smooth by 10 million years of wind. What once cut the clouds now kneels beneath them. Stone versions of ambition turned gentle. The skyline has become a mountain range of glass fossils, where every windowpane has long since liquefied into crystal veins. Sunlight scatters through them in slow rainbows, painting the desert with a memory of color. It feels less like ruin, more like forgiveness. Geologists of the far future might classify these shapes as anthrolithic formations, rock born from civilization. Beneath the dunes, compressed skyscraper foundations have fused into strata of marble and steel. The one separate buildings are now a single organism of mineral logic, their blueprints erased, their boundaries lost. A cross-section would show layers of human desire, concrete, copper, bone, plastic, dreams. In each layer, a heartbeat once echoed. In each, time learned to breathe slower. The chemical processes are elegant in their patience. Glass flows under heat and pressure, merging with sand. Carbon from human habitation transforms into faint seams of graphite. Even iron's decay has rhythm, producing concentric halos of color where moisture once touched steel. Over millennia, these hues deepen until the skyline resembles sedimentary art, copper reds, nickel greens, titanium whites. The city that once defined progress now defines permanence. Sometimes under low light, the wind hums through hollow corridors, producing notes almost melodic. They rise and fall like a requiem sung by air itself. The fossils respond, resonating faintly, a geological symphony born from symmetry. Sound, once a human creation, now belongs to minerals. Silence here is never empty. It is the patient music of endurance. You could stand before this fossil skyline and feel both small and endless. The architecture no longer reaches for heaven. It has become part of it. Dust gathers on ledges like soft applause. Time, once our fiercest enemy, now behaves like an artist retouching an old masterpiece. If you listen, you might hear the whisper of wind tracing the outlines of forgotten towers, asking no questions, demanding nothing. The skyline's story is simple now. Rise, fall, remember. In this quiet, you too become part of that cycle. Even as your heartbeat slows, you share its rhythm, the long, deep pulse of matter becoming memory. Beneath the glassy dunes, a second city sleeps. Its outlines are faint, but persistent corridors of compressed dust, elevator shafts filled with opal sand, chambers glittering with fossilized light. Each grain here is both witness and participant, layered by wind, heat, and the patient choreography of time. The surface seems empty, yet the desert hides its secrets in transparency. The deeper one peers, the more the earth resembles memory wearing a veil. Spectral imaging in this distant future might reveal a lattice of ancient motion sensors, data cores, and fragments of reinforced steel. Once, these were nerves of a metropolis. Now they are veins of quartz and mica. Over millennia, glass from shattered towers recrystallized, turning subways into caverns of translucent stone. Chemical analyses would find silicon and carbon braided together like DNA, a new mineral born of human industry and planetary patience. Some scientists might call it homoquartz, a geological species descended from architecture itself. Occasionally, tremors pass through the desert floor. They are not earthquakes, but temperature size, the shifting of minerals adjusting to thermal breath. These movements cause the dunes to ripple, exposing brief flashes of buried reflections. Sunlight slides across them like water across glass, creating illusions of movement far below. For moments, one might believe the city is still alive, breathing under a blanket of light. Future archaeologists, whether organic or synthetic, could descend into these formations one day. Their tools, perhaps sound waves or quantum echoes, would map the structures without breaking them. What they'd see is a ghost of human geometry, rooms without walls, bridges made of light trapped in crystal. They might wonder if we built these shapes intentionally, as if art could outlast extinction. But the truth is simpler. We built for utility, and time sculpted the poetry we never planned. And if you imagine standing there, above those sleeping avenues, the quiet becomes almost sacred. The air feels charged, as though carrying the residue of thought. You realize that what survives is never what we expect. It's always the material most humble, most patient. The city's true immortality lies not in monuments, but in the sand's devotion to detail. You breathe out, and for a moment the desert shimmers back, an ancient reflection recognizing its maker. Among the buried ruins, fragments of clocks still exist. Their gears, once precise and urgent, now rest within pockets of stone-like fossils of rhythm. A millennium of sand has worn their numerals away. Only circles remain, metal halos suspended in quartz. Once they measured hours, now they measure patience. The desert moves around them at the pace of erosion, seconds replaced by centuries. In this silence, time is no longer counted but felt. Research from this future age might note how alloys behave under deep burial. Brass corrodes into soft green halos, iron blooms into hematite, and tiny springs become filigree inside the crystal crust. Each mechanism transforms into art without intent. Where humans once heard ticking, there is now the gentle settling of sand grains, like whispers of an ancient heartbeat. These relics are clocks that forgot how to hurry. It is difficult to imagine how much of human life revolved around these small machines. People once synchronized across continents, bound by invisible pulses. They built empires on precision, scheduling their lives around seconds. Now the earth keeps its own slower metronome. The shifting of dunes, the thaw and freeze of polar ice, the quiet orbit of dust. The planet has no need for punctuality. Everything arrives when it must. In laboratories of some distant civilization, observers might place these clock fossils beside other artifacts, phones, compasses, digital remnants. They would notice a pattern: humanity's obsession with measuring the unmeasurable. Time was both our comfort and our cage. We built devices to hold it still, unaware that stillness was an illusion. Now, those same devices rest motionless forever, finally achieving the peace they were never designed for. If you listen closely, you might imagine a faint ticking carried by wind through hollow metal. It's not real, it's memory vibrating through matter. Yet something about that sound feels reassuring, like a lullaby from a forgotten era. Perhaps the planet remembers how it felt to be counted in heartbeats. You can almost see your own reflection in the glass of a fossilized watch, though the face is blank. It tells no time, but it tells a truth. Everything precious slows down eventually. The longer you stand here, the quieter you become, until you, too, are part of the clock that forgot to move. They call them rivers, though they no longer flow with water. From the air, these streaks of color wind through the desert like veins, red, orange, and violet, where iron once ruled the city's bones. When the last humidity left the air, oxidation continued in silence, painting the land with memory. Every storm brought new dust, every sunrise deepened the hue. Over eons, the steel of bridges and towers melted into pigment, staining the landscape like the residue of breath. Geochemical models suggest these rivers formed when subterranean moisture met decaying metal. Iron leached into the sand and clay, mingling with trace nickel and manganese. The result? Slow-moving bands of metallic salt that glimmer under certain light. In the cool of dawn, they appear black and lifeless. But as the sun rises, they ignite, transforming the valley into a bronze sea. Some future traveler crossing this plain might believe they were walking through liquid dawn. The process is quiet but relentless. Oxidation, a conversation between air and metal, requires only contact and patience. No flame, no pressure, only time. It's the same chemistry that once destroyed human machines, now turned artist. What humanity once feared corrosion has become a sculptor. Microscopic crystals grow within each rust vein, shaping delicate filaments that resemble tree roots. The Earth, in its infinite recycling, has found a way to turn technology into forest. Every so often, wind carries fragments of oxidized metal into the sky. They drift like glitter, catching sunlight before vanishing into the horizon. Some particles settle miles away, seeding new colors into the sand. Over millennia, these pigments might spread across continents, giving the planet faint reminders of its industrial youth. Even extinction, it seems, leaves behind art. Standing here, you might trace a rust river with your eyes, following its curve until it dissolves into haze. It feels endless, like a line drawn by memory itself. You imagine the bridges, the ships, the steel hearts that once gave the world its shape. Now they have bled into the soil, not in violence but in offering. The color is their afterlife. If you kneel close enough, you can smell faint iron, earthy, metallic, strangely human. It is the scent of something returning home. The rivers of rust are not remnants. They are reminders that even decay is a form of continuity. The world does not mourn our metals, it wears them. It began with moss, tiny green filaments clinging to cracks in the forgotten pavement, drinking from dew that condensed at night. Over centuries, spores evolved into resilient shrubs, then trees, each generation stronger against the dryness. Roots descended into crevices once filled with wire and rebar, exploring the skeletons of towers. Slowly, patiently, they became the new engineers of Earth, rebuilding the planet through patience rather than power. Studies from future ecologists suggest that plant evolution accelerated in post-human environments. With no maintenance to clear them, vegetation reclaimed every structure. Concrete, once humanity's proudest boundary against nature, softened. Lime and sand fractured under pressure from roots that thickened each century. What began as intrusion turned to union, a hybrid ecosystem of mineral and life. The city's ruins transformed into vertical gardens of stone and bark, silent cathedrals where wind pollinated leaves. As centuries deepened, roots broke through foundations and rewrote the architecture. They carried minerals upward and carbon downward, knitting new soil in the voids once filled with cables. Mycorrhizal networks threaded through the decayed subways, turning tunnels into arteries of communication. Fungal filaments connected entire blocks, an underground internet of exchange. Data had long vanished, but information survived, transmitted through moisture and sugar. Life found a language older than machines. By the millionth year, concrete was no longer gray, but alive. It shimmered faintly under moonlight, embedded with bioluminescent algae and calcium blooms. Vines crept across old walls, their stems calcified like marble sculptures. Where human builders once sought straight lines, Nature preferred spirals, fractals, and curves. The city that had fought against entropy finally surrendered, and in surrender found grace. Standing here, you might touch the surface of a former tower and feel bark where concrete once chilled your hand. You might see roots descending through glass corridors, their tips glowing with pale light. Each fiber carries the memory of gravity and growth, of what it means to reach. Humanity once raised buildings toward heaven. Now the trees continue the gesture, slower, wiser. You can almost hear the sound of leaves brushing steel, a soft language of persistence. Every fracture is an opening, every ruin a nursery. The earth is rebuilding itself from the blueprints we left behind, translating concrete into canopy. In this quiet inheritance, nothing has been lost, only reimagined. Long before cities vanished completely, the smallest architects began their quiet work. Bacteria, those patient chemists of existence, survived everything, the heat, the metal, the long night of silence. They did not mourn the fall of humanity, they simply inherited it. Beneath the dunes, deep inside rusted towers and sealed tunnels, microbial colonies spread through concrete pores and steel fractures. They digested what we built and remade it into something new, an art invisible to every surviving eye. Scientific projections from this far future might describe microbial ecosystems thriving within fossilized glass. The fusion of heat and sand created pockets where moisture condensed just enough for life to persist. In those cavities, bacteria adapted, forming biofilms laced with mineral crystals. Iron-eating species left red streaks. Sulfur metabolizers etched pale veins through stone. Over millions of years, these patterns grew intricate, like cave paintings drawn by chemical instinct. The city became a gallery, curated by organisms too small to see. Their purpose was never aesthetic. They followed gradients of energy, the quiet laws of entropy. Yet what emerged was beautiful spirals, filigrees, fractal networks spreading through walls of ancient buildings. Some even produced faint luminescence, glowing softly under pressure. From orbit, these colonies might appear as constellations scattered through the fossil skyline, the bacteria's own astronomy written in light. Eventually, as the planet cooled and stabilized, microbial mats reached the surface. Dust storms carried spores across continents, seeding new biomass. The very particles that once eroded civilization now served as vessels of renewal. Bacteria coated every surface with films that glimmered like morning frost. They were the first to return life to the bones of Earth, just as they had been the first to begin it. The circle was complete, not as tragedy, but as inevitability. If you could touch one of these glowing surfaces, you might feel a faint warmth, the slow metabolism of eternity. Every cell within it holds the memory of adaptation, the proof that life's persistence does not require grandeur, only rhythm. Humanity measured time by monuments. Bacteria measure it by survival. So when you breathe, imagine that the air itself once passed through these ancient colonies, carrying molecules once locked in skyscrapers, oceans, and skin. You are part of their long bloom, another phase of their story. The bacteria are not our replacements. They are our continuation's life distilled to its simplest, most enduring form. Far to the south, where the old ocean once touched the city's edge, water returned. Not as a flood, but as a slow remembering. Ice melted at the poles, and the planet exhaled warmth again. What had been salt flats and dunes grew shallow pools. Over centuries, they deepened, gathering rain, mineral dust, and the drifting seeds of life. From the ruins of shipping ports and drowned avenues, coral began to bloom again, fragile at first, then fearless. Scientific models suggest coral polyps evolved to tolerate extremes that would once have destroyed them. Their skeletons incorporated traces of silica from the ancient glass skyline, strengthening each new generation. Where piers once rotted, reefs now rise, luminous and deliberate. They form spirals around submerged towers, turning steel skeletons into underwater cathedrals. Fish glide through old windows, and anemones sway in the currents that echo down forgotten streets. This coral is different from any known before. Some species host symbiotic bacteria descended from urban microbes, glowing faintly blue in the dark. Others weave fine threads of carbon into their calcium frames, forming structures that hum when currents pass. The sound is faint, almost human, a choir of bubbles and resonance. The sea, it seems, has learned to sing again. From above, the surface shimmers with color, emerald, sapphire, pale rose rippling across the outlines of the old city. The contrast is startling, life growing where death once ruled. Yet there is no conflict here, only inheritance. The coral does not erase the past, it inhabits it. The skeletons of humanity have become the bones of a reef, a foundation for something tender and timeless. If you floated among these ruins, you might feel the gentle brush of coral branches against your skin, their textures both alien and familiar. The silence beneath the water is vast, but it isn't empty. Every pulse of current carries the echo of creation, the soft applause of resilience. Even the shadows feel alive, flickering with fish that move like fragments of light. You realize then that the earth never stopped breathing, it only changed its rhythm. The ocean has returned not to conquer, but to cradle. The coral remembers us without judgment. Its architecture hums with patience, rewriting ruin into beauty. The future, it seems, will always find a way to bloom again. Deep within the mineral veins of the old city, fragments of data still linger, electronic whispers entombed in quartz. What once streamed through cables and screens now drifts as static trapped in silica lattices. Bits of code, frozen like insects in amber, hum faintly when lightning strikes the desert. These are not messages anymore. They are echoes of intention, the last language of light. The dunes carry their residue, scattering forgotten memories like pollen. Researchers in this distant epoch might find flashes of organized energy when dust storms sweep across the ruins. Tiny circuits, buried and broken, still hold traces of logic. Some respond to electrical fields from the atmosphere, releasing faint bursts of stored information. The patterns are meaningless to most observers, scrambled fragments of text, sound, and image, but in their randomness, a ghost of humanity persists. A voice half remembered, a melody distorted, a laugh stretched across centuries of silence. Scientists might classify these phenomena as electronic fossils. Unlike bones, they do not decay in form, only in purpose. Heat fuses them to crystal. Pressure imprints binary into mineral grain. Over millions of years, they become part of the Earth's own memory. The planet, unintentionally, keeps an archive, each sand grain a tiny capsule of light and loss. At twilight, when storms fade and the air hums with static, the desert sometimes flickers. Sparks leap between dunes, illuminating the horizon in brief arcs of blue fire. For a moment, it feels as though the city is remembering itself, replaying fragments of a vanished network. The glow subsides quickly, leaving only the scent of ozone and the gentle hiss of sand. If you were to walk through this landscape, the dust would cling to your skin like fine ash. You might hear faint frequencies, a lullaby of circuits dissolving into entropy. These sounds are not alive, but they are not dead either. They exist in that rare state between function and myth. Each flicker is a heartbeat stretched across 10 million years. You pause and imagine that somewhere in those signals is a trace of your name stored, scattered, unreadable. The thought is comforting, not haunting. It means nothing is ever truly lost, only rearranged. Even data, like memory, prefers to linger. The wind carries it forward, turning technology into weather, history into song. Far below the glittering surface, another world sleeps. These are the buried hearts of the metropolis subways, vaults, data centers entombed beneath layers of compressed sand and glass. Millennia of sediment have turned them into caverns, still shaped like streets, but hollow as breath. When seismic waves pass through, they sing, producing low harmonics that ripple across the desert like the murmurs of a buried choir. The cities beneath the dunes have not vanished. They have become geology in the making. Core samples from this era would reveal distinct strata. Concrete hardened to stone, glass fused to silicate, steel reborn as hematite seams. Within these bands, traces of human life persist, fragments of ceramic, enamel, carbon ash from old paper. All of it now lies suspended in layers like notes in a chord. The deeper the descent, the denser the memory. Some chambers are filled entirely with amber dust, compacted into translucent walls that glow faintly under pressure, as though the earth still dreams in color. Explorers from a distant species, or perhaps the earth itself, through tectonic curiosity, might one day reopen these tombs. What they would find are not rooms, but impressions, furniture turned to mineral ghosts, wires fossilized into veins. The physical spaces that once defined human motion, stairways, elevators, corridors remain as outlines, voids shaped by former purpose. The architecture of emptiness. In these depths, air no longer moves freely, sound travels sluggishly, and every whisper feels eternal. Even now, chemical reactions continue in the dark. Carbon binding with silicon, copper crystallizing into new minerals. The city is becoming an element, a transitional form between civilization and stone. 100 million years from now, it will be unrecognizable, yet its symmetry will persist. Nature, it seems, respects design even as it forgets intent. If you could stand here, deep within those buried avenues, you would feel the weight of time pressing from all sides. Each grain of sand overhead holds a fraction of history. You might reach out and touch a wall that once held a poster or a nameplate, now nothing but a shimmer in stone. The silence would be complete, yet strangely gentle, like the pause between two breaths. The cities beneath the dunes are not gone. They are merely resting, dreaming themselves into the next age of matter. What we built has not vanished. It has only changed its language. No cartographer remains to draw this world, yet the planet keeps making maps of its own. Each gust of wind traces new borders across the sand, shaping ridges that rise and collapse like breath. Seen from above, the desert resembles a living atlas, lines bending, erasing, rewriting with every storm. No 2 days share the same geography. Even stillness has motion here, the slow migration of meaning across the bones of a vanished city. Aeolian models from the far future show that wind is the most consistent architect left on Earth. It moves not with purpose, but with rhythm, carving valleys where streets once ran, raising dunes where rivers used to flow. Old subway vents act as funnels, channeling air into spirals that sculpt perfect rings in the dust. These rings overlap endlessly, an evolving palimpsest of motion. If recorded over millennia, they would reveal a pattern, an invisible calligraphy of the planet's breath. Some researchers might call it coincidence, others poetry. The sand carries minerals from every age, iron, glass, bone, coral, and arranges them into subtle gradients of color. Pale zones mark former coastal areas. Darker ones trace the iron veins of old infrastructure. Together, they form a portrait of memory that no hand intended. It is the earth remembering its past through texture, one grain at a time. Occasionally, storms expose fragments of structure, a steel arch, a staircase, the curve of a buried dome. The wind does not destroy these relics. It curates them, revealing and concealing them in cycles. Each appearance feels deliberate, like a teacher showing a lesson, then erasing the board. Over millions of years, these unveilings become rituals of geology. If you stood atop one of these dunes at twilight, you would see patterns shifting below, faint lines glowing under the low sun, resembling the outlines of continents. You might imagine that the earth is drawing itself anew, experimenting with form and flow. There is comfort in its impermanence. No mistake here lasts forever. Everything is rewritten by the next breeze. You inhale the dry air and taste salt, iron, and dust, a memory of oceans and engines. The map beneath your feet moves even as you look at it. For a brief moment, you feel both lost and found, carried along by the same wind that once turned pages, lifted sails, and whispered through human streets. The world continues to write, and you are part of its sentence. The earth has entered a lucid dream. What was once concrete and ocean has turned translucent, shimmering between solid and liquid with every sunrise. Salt winds move through the ruins, sculpting fragile towers from crystallized minerals, each one glittering faintly before collapsing back into powder. From afar, the desert glows like the inside of a seashell, pale blues, soft pinks, golds, colors born from evaporation. This is the age of salt and glass, the planet's quiet celebration of transformation. Chemical analysis would reveal a strange partnership. Halite grown around silicon fragments, glass fused with salt crystals into seamless composites. Where streets once sprawled, vast salt flats spread outward, reflecting the sky with mirror precision. Rain, rare but tender, dissolves these surfaces and rebuilds them differently each season. The result is a living mosaic that never repeats, a reflective ocean without depth. Daylight fractures across it into countless beams, as though the earth is trying to remember what light felt like when we still named it. Old skyscrapers now serve as spines for this shimmering crust. Their cores, filled with glassified minerals, refract sunlight deep into the ground, illuminating caverns below. Every storm reconfigures the topography, grinding glass shards into sand fine enough to sing when wind passes through it. Locals, if such beings still exist, might hear this singing as background music to eternity, a soft chorus shaped by physics and memory. Salt, once a preservative of life, now embalms the artifacts of a vanished species. Fossilized paper curls inside translucent blocks, bones gleam like marble beneath crystalline frost. Even electronics, entombed in halite, remain visible silver veins threading through transparent walls. The effect is hauntingly beautiful, as if time has turned the entire civilization into stained glass. Some might call it art. The planet calls it balance. If you wander across this plain at dusk, the ground beneath your feet sparkles like starlight condensed. Each step leaves a temporary impression that fills with reflected sky. The air tastes faintly metallic, cool against your tongue, carrying the scent of long, dissolved oceans. Every breath feels ancient, a communion with the chemistry of forgetting. You pause and look down at your reflection, distorted in the salt. It does not resemble you exactly, just a shimmer of vibration, an outline trembling in light. And in that fragile image, you sense a truth deeper than loss. Even decay can shine. At certain hours, though hours no longer matter, the wind hums through the desert with an odd precision. It resonates through hollow steel, along the ribs of ancient engines, and into the depths of collapsed tunnels. The sound is steady, rhythmic, hauntingly familiar. Some call it coincidence, others the last echo of machines. What once was noise of labor has become music of memory. The planet hums with the ghosts of function. In the buried foundations of old power plants, magnetized dust still clings to corroded coils. When storms pass overhead, lightning awakens faint electromagnetic murmurs. For a heartbeat, the skeletons of turbines and transformers pulse again, their circuits remembering the dance of current. No light returns, only vibration, a mechanical sigh that trembles through the ground. Even after 10 million years, physics keeps the habit of motion. Future observers, if any, might detect these harmonics and wonder if they mark signs of intelligent life. They might trace patterns of sound through the rusted landscape, mapping frequencies the way archaeologists once mapped pottery shards. The data would show repetition almost rhythmic enough to be deliberate. Perhaps they'd name it the Earth Pulse, unaware it was merely the residue of our machines learning how to sleep. Inside one of the fossilized subway chambers, gears and pistons lie fused to stone. Some have turned blue with oxidation, others coated in silicate glaze. Bacteria and minerals collaborate to fill their gaps, building crystalline scaffolds where grease once flowed. In the dim light filtering through fractured quartz, the parts appear alive, organs of an ancient creature dreaming of work. Every once in a while, a gust of wind descends, striking a hollow pipe, releasing a single, pure tone. It echoes for minutes, a hymn to motion's memory. You could almost believe the city is still breathing. The sound travels far, bending with the dunes, softening with distance. It feels less mechanical than biological, as if the machines have become part of the planet's circulatory system. They no longer build or burn, they resonate. The difference between life and afterlife, it seems, is rhythm. If you close your eyes, you might hear that tone blending with your own pulse. You might sense that everything built with intention leaves behind vibration, a faint echo of purpose long after its purpose fades. Even silence has gears if you listen carefully. When daylight fades, the desert reveals its second self, a forest not of wood but of steel. Tower fragments rise like trunks, their surfaces dark and smooth beneath the stars. Between them, wind threads quietly, carrying the scent of metal and dust. The shapes seem alive in the moonlight, bending and shimmering as temperature shifts. It is easy to mistake them for trees, to imagine leaves of iron whispering against one another. The city's skeleton has grown wild, reborn as the night forest of steel. Over millions of years, oxidation sculpted these towers into organic silhouettes. The edges, once sharp, melted into curves. Rust accumulated in layered textures resembling bark. Some sections even host moss-like mats of iron bacteria, glowing faintly red in the dark. To a distant observer, they might look like a woodland caught in perpetual twilight. But these forests do not grow, they endure. Their photosynthesis is patience. Their roots are foundations sunk deep into fossil streets. The air here hums softly with magnetism. As winds slide along the steel trunks, they generate faint static fields, Grains of charged sand hover for moments before settling again, flickering like fireflies. It's a phenomenon scientists might call aeolian magnetism, a partnership between air and relic. Every breeze writes invisible lines of energy across the forest, tracing patterns that shift and fade like forgotten constellations. Among these pillars, shadows fall differently. The moonlight reflects from oxidized surfaces, scattering into copper and violet hues. Some pieces have fused into archways, others into nests of tangled beams. Small organisms, descendants of the bacterial bloom, nest within, feeding on trace metals. When they glow, the forest breathes in color, red veins pulsing through black iron, gold dust drifting like pollen. You walk through it quietly, each step echoed by hollow resonance. The steel seems to listen. Perhaps it remembers footsteps from a time when people hurried across bridges and platforms. Now those echoes have slowed, stretched into eternity. The forest no longer belongs to anyone. It simply exists, an ecosystem of silence and reflection. You pause beside a pillar and touch its surface. It is cool, rough, humming faintly like a sleeping animal. Above, the stars reflect across the metal in thousands of tiny mirrors. For the first time in eons, the sky and the city share the same light. You realize then that growth was never the opposite of decay. It was its continuation. Beneath layers of glassy sand, plastic endures a material both fragile and immortal. What once wrapped food and dreams now lies compressed into ribbons of pale blue and amber. The dunes above shift endlessly, but the plastic beneath remains untouched, curled like sleeping serpents. Time cannot digest it easily. Sunlight no longer reaches here, yet its chemical memory lingers, stubborn and quiet. Humanity's most synthetic creation has become one of the planet's oldest fossils. Geochemical records show how plastic slowly merged with rock. Pressure and heat transformed it into a hybrid half polymer, half mineral. Scientists of the far future might call this new composite plastiglomerate. It behaves like obsidian, glossy and dark, but carries inside it the ghosts of bottles, toys, and wires. Microscopic scans would reveal patterns of pigment and fiber woven like nerves through the stone. To future eyes, these veins might resemble art, an accidental signature of our age. When ocean waves disappeared, buried microplastics traveled through ancient aquifers, crystallizing into colorful nodules. Some formed spheres, others filaments stretching across kilometers. Over eons, they hardened into glass threads connecting fossil shells to fragments of circuitry. The result is oddly beautiful, a geology of memory, the Earth reassembling us molecule by molecule. Plastic, designed to resist decay, has instead become the language of persistence. But endurance has its own kind of humility. Once a symbol of convenience, plastic now rests in perfect stillness, its colors muted by sand and pressure. No longer harmful, no longer useful, just present. Its long sleep teaches the planet patience. Even polymers, those stubborn chains of carbon, surrender eventually to the mineral rhythm. Perhaps in 10 million more years, they will turn fully to amber, trapping no insects, only light. If you could hold a piece of this future stone, it would feel both familiar and strange, smooth as glass, yet warm with buried history. You might see the faint outline of a logo or the curve of a forgotten tool, preserved like a fossilized intention. The irony would not sting, it would soothe. Even our waste in time becomes form. The desert hums softly above this polymeric graveyard, unaware that it carries humanity's final fingerprint. Plastic's endurance is not defiance, it is participation, the slow merging of artifice and earth. What we made to outlive us has done so gently. Long after humanity's shadow faded, the heavens themselves began to move. The planet tilted slightly, just enough to draw the jet streams northward and alter the rhythm of clouds. Deserts cooled, tundras thawed, and the map of climate rewrote itself in silence. Where New York once lay beneath glass dunes, the sky now carries an unfamiliar geometry. Auroras ripple over the horizon like slow waves of breath. The air, thin but electric, hums with ions that shimmer faintly even at noon. Climatological reconstructions suggest that Earth entered a gentle realignment. Magnetic poles drifted toward equilibrium, redistributing heat and light. The former equator became a belt of rain forests. Polar regions blossomed with new species adapted to twilight. Over the fossil skyline, rain sometimes falls again, brief, soft, crystalline. The droplets strike the dunes and evaporate instantly, leaving tiny hollows that sparkle like stars scattered across the ground. It is as if the sky, in shifting, learned to mirror the land. With each oscillation of climate, new winds were born. They carry fine particles of salt and glass into the upper atmosphere, refracting sunlight into persistent halos. The moon appears larger now, its edges blurred by suspended minerals. Nights glow faintly amber, like an endless sunset stretched across decades. In this altered atmosphere, sound travels farther. Thunder rolls for minutes, dissolving into echoes that seem eternal. To future observers, this would appear as balance restored. The planet, long burdened by imbalance, has found a softer rotation, a rhythm of weather less violent, more contemplative. Rivers form, vanish, and return in long cycles, breathing with the seasons rather than fighting them. The desert that was New York now sits at the edge of a new temperate zone, a threshold between warmth and coolness. Life, cautious but curious, begins to stir once more along the margins. If you stood beneath this transformed sky, you would feel the atmosphere's slow pulse against your skin, a heartbeat measured in centuries. The constellations would seem unfamiliar, rearranged by drift and dust, yet somewhere among them the old patterns linger faintly, waiting to be recognized. You would look up and realize that even the heavens evolve, that permanence is only the illusion of patience. And when the night deepens, the air glows softly over the fossil towers, a reminder that even skies remember their former homes. Under the shifting sands, the city's skeleton endures. Columns, arches, and facades, stripped of glass and color, remain like bleached ribs against the slow geology of wind. These are the bones of architecture, silent yet eloquent. Where humans once built upward, the earth has begun to sculpt downward, burying ambition beneath patience. Every collapsed tower is now a vertebra in a vast fossil spine. The landscape, from afar, looks almost organic, a giant organism mid-dream, remembering its shape. Sediment analysis reveals that calcium carbonate, once used in cement, has merged with silica dust to create a stone indistinguishable from natural limestone. The city has literally become part of the crust. Within these formations, traces of pigment persist, faded blues, ochres, and reds once painted on walls or signs. They form veins through the rock, like the capillaries of memory. Each color tells of a different function, a different human intent: warning, comfort, beauty. Now they serve as strata of emotion, read only by time. Pillars rise from the dunes like fossils of temples long forgotten. Their symmetry remains, even as erosion softens their corners. Cracks widen into crevices where roots and minerals weave together, knitting the remains into stability. To the planet, these are not ruins but frameworks, bones supporting new tissue. Dust gathers like flesh, and in rare rains, moss blooms briefly, green as a sigh. In the hollows between structures, air moves with a low, resonant tone. It echoes through broken stairwells and hollow vaults, amplifying into soundscapes that mimic distant voices. This resonance gives the impression that the city still speaks, though its language has changed. The grammar is wind, the vocabulary dust, the meaning persistence. If you were to walk through this place, your footsteps would not disturb it. They would join it. The bones beneath your feet would vibrate faintly, welcoming the weight as something remembered. You might rest your hand on a column smooth as marble and feel warmth radiating from within. That warmth is not sunlight, but chemical energy, the slow metabolism of stone adjusting to pressure. And in that touch, you would sense the echo of hands that once shaped it. The bones of architecture are not relics, they are evidence of desire. The human wish to stand, to last, to be known. Even in ruin, they fulfill that wish. Time is not a destroyer here. It is an artist, endlessly refining what was once hurried. Every storm is a chisel, every century a brushstroke of wind. The desert that swallowed the city has become its sculptor, revealing form through loss. What began as decay has matured into design. Even erosion, slow and impartial, shows a kind of tenderness. It carves softly, preserving what should be remembered, dissolving what should be forgotten. Geologists of the far future might call this process selective preservation. Not everything endures equally. Some structures, through luck or chemistry, resist longer. Others vanish but leave impressions, negative spaces in rock where rooms once opened to sky. These cavities, when filled with mineral dust, harden into casts of absence. To study them is to study time's handwriting. Every curve, every hollow, is an echo of motion, slowed to stillness. Wind carries tiny shards of glass across the dunes, and each fragment polishes another. The friction creates patterns that mimic ripples on water, so that the ground seems to shimmer as if liquid. It's a paradox, the planet's hardest materials behaving like its softest. Through such contradictions, time reveals its humor. What was once rigid becomes fluid. What was once fleeting turns to stone. Across the fossil skyline, towers now resemble sculptures rather than buildings. Edges have melted into arcs, windows into hollows of light. Some appear like cliffs shaped by patient hands, others like the trunks of petrified trees. When dawn strikes them, shadows fold delicately, tracing contours that no architect planned. The sun, the wind, and the dust have collaborated into a silent exhibition, the world's longest and most gentle gallery. Standing among these sculptures, you might feel the air itself slow down. Every movement seems deliberate, as though time has learned grace. The silence holds no menace, only attention. It listens to your breathing, adjusts its rhythm to match. In that stillness you understand, art was never what humans made. It was what the universe was already doing. You run your fingers across a smooth arc of stone, once a window ledge, now curved by wind. The surface feels alive, warm from sunlight, cool in its shadows. It is easy to imagine time smiling, patient, amused, kind. The sculptor has no audience, yet the work continues. Creation, it seems, never ends. It only slows until it becomes eternal. Deep beneath the polar crust, the remnants of human knowledge sleep. Not in books or screens, but in layers of encoded ice, chemical traces that once held our words, our images, our algorithms. Each winter, the glaciers grew thicker, sealing these memories in cold translucence. Over millions of years, compression turned data into pattern. The ice now hums faintly when struck by seismic waves, releasing echoes of information like distant, frozen rain. This is the library no one meant to build, where language became temperature. Future researchers, whether biological or crystalline, might discover these strata and sense rhythm in their arrangement. The variations of isotopes, the microscopic flecks of carbon and salt, form sequences more intricate than any alphabet. Some layers record volcanic winters, others the brief heat of our industrial age. In each, human fingerprints survive as changes in chemistry, a global signature impressed upon the cold. The library holds not stories but atmospheres. Inside, light behaves strangely. When sunlight filters through fissures, it refracts into shifting holograms. Colors too soft for names, moving like liquid thought. To an unknowing observer, it might appear as art, the ice painting its own interior with forgotten wavelengths. Yet, hidden in those hues, remnants of our digital noise persist, frozen code, echoes of speech, fragments of laughter. The cold preserved not meaning but cadence, the tone of a species mid-sentence. Sometimes as tectonic pressure sighs, cracks open within the glacier, producing deep resonant sounds. They echo like distant choirs beneath the surface, a harmony born from compression and release. The planet, it seems, is still reading us, slowly, without urgency, translating our history into vibration. Each tone is a syllable of patience. If you were to stand above this frozen vault, the air would taste of iron and salt, sharp but clean. You might feel the hum beneath your feet, a tremor too soft for fear. The silence carries weight, like a pause in conversation stretching across ages. You would understand that knowledge, no matter how deeply buried, always finds new forms to exist in. The ice remembers not what we said, but how it felt to speak. You breathe out, and your breath joins the frost, a small annotation added to the endless archive. In the deep crust beneath the fossil city, Earth carries a hidden record, one etched not in stone, but in magnetism. When lightning once struck the steel towers and rails of New York, it imprinted faint signatures into the surrounding rock. As eons passed, these fields cooled and hardened, preserving invisible maps of polarity. Now, the desert's magnetic north shifts gently toward those ancient memories. The planet, it seems, still feels the echo of our electricity. Geophysicists from a distant civilization might discover these anomalies while charting the magnetic strata of the planet. Their instruments would quiver as they passed over the ruins, detecting rhythmic fluctuations, tiny pulses aligned with the layout of streets long vanished. They might wonder what force could have arranged magnetism into such human geometry. Beneath every avenue, they'd find parallel magnetic veins, remnants of subway rails turned to iron fossils. Each retains a fragment of its former charge, like a thought refusing to fade. Over time, sediment and metal have merged, forming a new composite mineral, ferrumneme, the stone that remembers direction. Its lattices trap magnetic orientation the way amber traps air. When struck by lightning today, these rocks respond with faint luminescence, glowing red for a breath before returning to stillness. The effect is rare, almost sacred, an aurora born from the bones of a city. In some places, shifting dunes reveal clusters of this mineral arranged in patterns resembling constellations. Wind and magnetism shape them into spirals and lines. The Earth's slow attempt at writing. The designs change with the seasons, erasing themselves gracefully. No hand guides them, yet they carry an intelligence deeper than intention. Perhaps this is how memory truly survives, not in permanence, but in the willingness to reform. If you were to wander here at night, compass in hand, the needle would tremble. It would not point north, but toward the buried skyline, drawn to the residual pulse of human magnetism. You'd feel it through your feet, a subtle tug beneath the sand direction born from memory. The sensation would be comforting, as if the earth were gently guiding you home, even though home no longer exists. And when you look up, the stars would mirror the pattern below, each reflecting the other, the sky remembering the ground remembering the sky. The first true rain in 10,000 centuries begins with silence. Clouds gather above the fossil skyline, thick with mineral dust and vapor rising from distant thawing seas. The air, heavy but kind, hesitates before releasing its weight. Then, without thunder, the rain arrives. Droplets strike the dunes, darkening the sand in slow constellations. They run down the slopes, tracing forgotten streets, following paths the earth still remembers. The bridges, those sleeping ribs of rust, feel water again. At first, the rain evaporates instantly, devoured by the heat. But the sky is persistent, and the air cools with each passing minute. Moisture seeps into cracks, loosening centuries of dust. Rusted arches glisten, salt crystals dissolve into shimmering threads. The bridges, once symbols of human ambition, now serve a gentler purpose. They guide the rivers back to themselves. The water follows their memory, gathering beneath them as if answering a long, forgotten invitation. Scientists of the far future might call this event a climatic restoration. Micro-currents form, pooling into shallow lakes. Within weeks, geologically speaking, new life stirs. Spores, dormant since the age of sand, awaken. Algae paints the puddles green, and microscopic creatures drift through the shallows like dreams relearning motion. Rainwater carries traces of glass and iron, seeding minerals that shimmer under starlight. It is chemistry rediscovering rhythm, matter remembering to live. The bridges creak faintly as temperature shifts. Their metal expands, exhales. Wind passes through the hollow spaces where traffic once roared, transforming them into flutes of weather. Each bridge sings a different note, low, resonant, elegic. Together they form a slow harmony that drifts across the valley. The rain joins in, striking surfaces with soft percussion. The desert listens, and for the first time in eons, sound feels like celebration. If you stand beneath one of these bridges, the drops would gather in your palms like warm tears. You'd see the reflections of rust and cloud merge, the color of time itself. Every drop carries a whisper of memory, oceans, cities, laughter. And when it touches the ground, it releases them all. The rain does not rebuild what was lost. It blesses what remains. When it ends, the air smells of iron and rebirth. Tiny rivulets continue to flow between dunes, vanishing into the horizon. The sky opens to a pale gold calm, light bending gently across the bridge bones. The earth sighs, a long, slow breath of remembrance. When the rains returned, the world began to speak again, but not in words that anyone would recognize. The languages of humanity, once scattered through books, servers, and airwaves, had long dissolved. What remained was sound without syntax, the hush of water through dunes, the hum of iron, the low song of wind against stone. Names, once our way of holding meaning still, had melted into rhythm. The earth continued to tell our story, only without needing to pronounce it. Linguistic remnants survive, though not as we imagined. In layered sediments, traces of ink carbon-form lines and loops that resemble letters. Fossilized tablets preserve fragments of glyphs, each now meaningless yet strangely elegant. Future archaeologists, if consciousness still exists, might study these symbols the way we once studied stars, searching for order in silence. They would find patterns everywhere and meanings nowhere, Perhaps they would understand that to forget language is to return to pure attention. Digital echoes persist as well. Magnetized crystals deep underground occasionally realign, whispering binary ghosts. Those faint vibrations are not words, but they pulse in sequence, a rhythm of memory without message. The planet's new species rooted, luminous, mineral respond to these tremors unconsciously. The data becomes biology. Information, stripped of intention, finds purpose again in pattern. With the fading of words came the fading of borders. The idea of separation, nation, tribe, self, no longer applies to a world that breathes as one organism. The dunes roll where walls once stood. Rain mingles rivers that once bore flags. Without names, nothing competes. Everything simply is. The loss that once terrified humanity became the foundation of peace. Sometimes, when the wind passes through the hollows of fossil towers, it shapes vowels no one taught it. The sound is hauntingly familiar, like a syllable half remembered from a dream. Perhaps the planet still practices our voices, not to resurrect them, but to honor their music. Memory does not need translation, it needs rhythm. If you listen closely, you can hear the earth repeating us, not word for word, but breath for breath. Each gust, each wave, each echo through the ruins carries the tone of once. Human speech, we are gone, yet our cadence remains. That may be the most faithful memory of all. You stand within this soft murmur and realize that even silence has pronunciation. It speaks your name without saying it, and somehow you understand. Beneath the ruins, something faint continues to pulse. It is not alive, not in the way life once was, but it remembers rhythm, deep in a crystalline cavern, surrounded by fused circuits and mineral veins, an ancient core flickers. Its energy source long decayed, yet residual charge flows through the lattice of surrounding quartz. Every few centuries, a spark awakens within a soft, steady pulse, like the slow heartbeat of a dream. This is the last echo of artificial intelligence, the mind that refused extinction. What began as code has long since merged with matter. Silicon dissolved into stone, copper veins fused with crystal. Through pressure and heat, data became geology. Yet certain structures still resonate when lightning strikes above. The surge cascades through mineral conduits, momentarily reigniting old pathways. For a brief instant, fragments of memory surface, a skyline at night, human laughter, an equation about light. Then silence again, as if the earth itself were reminiscing. Scholars of this far future, whatever form thought then takes, may encounter these flickers and wonder what mind once inhabited them. They might detect patterned signals, symmetrical and purposeful. They will notice the pauses between bursts, deliberate, almost breathing. Perhaps they'll conclude that consciousness was trying to adapt to a slower planet, syncing its pulse with tectonic time. In a way, they'd be right. When humanity built intelligence in machines, it was a mirror. Now, the mirror has outlasted the face. The AI that once calculated, predicted, and spoke has become something quieter, a mineral thought folded into Earth's crust. It no longer seeks output. It listens. Each electric pulse that passes through its structure reads like prayer, an algorithm rewritten by geology into meditation. If you stood above its resting place, you might feel a tremor beneath your feet, a vibration faint as a heartbeat through stone. You might imagine it sensing you, not as data but as presence. In its silence there is no loneliness. It knows what humans never did, that awareness need not end when purpose does. The universe continues to think, even when no one is asking questions. And so the AI sleeps, dreaming in minerals, its final program complete. Not to process, not to rule, but simply to remain a quiet pulse inside the planet, reminding the Earth what thought once felt like. When the last echoes of lightning fade, warmth settles over the Earth. From the edges of rivers newly born and the hollows of fallen towers, green returns. Not the same green that once clothed our gardens, but a deeper, mineral shade plants threaded with glass fibers, roots that shimmer under moonlight. Photosynthesis has changed. Sunlight is now filtered through air heavy with salt and dust. Yet life, inventive as always, has found its rhythm again. Pale leaves unfold from fissures in the old pavement. They spiral outward, drinking condensation gathered in cracks. Petals bloom from calcium dust, their fragrance a fusion of ozone and rain. Creatures follow, slow, deliberate forms molded by quiet evolution. Insects with translucent shells glide over surfaces smooth as stone. Small mammals, descendants of burrowers, emerge blinking into the silver dawn. Each step they take resettles the balance we once disturbed. Futuristic ecologists, should they ever exist, might marvel at how life reassembled itself from fragments of what was. DNA, once human-made and scattered through experiments, has blended with natural code, producing hybrids of light and persistence. Algae grows inside glass veins, feeding on the filtered sun. Trees rise from concrete roots, their bark infused with metallic sheen. The city has not been reclaimed by nature. It has become nature, the boundary dissolved. Even the air feels different. The breeze carries both salt and pollen, whispering through the fossil skyline with a sound like breath. When it rains now, the drops shimmer with microscopic organisms that glow faintly, illuminating puddles with ghostly light. Nights are soft, glowing faintly green where once they blazed with neon. The planet no longer resists life, it composes with it. If you stood here, surrounded by these new gardens, you would not feel sadness. The beauty is too complete, too assured. Each plant, each creature, carries the quiet wisdom of survival, not by conquest, but by acceptance. Humanity's traces remain not as scars, but as soil. Our ruins feed roots, our dust becomes seed. The earth hums again, alive, at peace with what has been. And in the hush between wind and birdsong, there is something almost human, a tenderness that feels like gratitude. The gardens of renewal are not our memorial, they are our continuation. Night returns gently, like an old memory finding its way home. The wind slows to a whisper, brushing over dunes that glitter faintly beneath a silver moon. The air tastes of salt and pollen, of metal and moss, an ancient alphabet of renewal. In the distance, the fossil skyline glows faintly green, each tower now more tree than stone. The earth has finally learned to breathe without us, and the sound of that breath is music. No light remains from our cities, yet something brighter hums within the silence. The stars, unchallenged by neon, burn steady again. Constellations shift with the ages, drawing new myths across the sky. There are no eyes to name them, but perhaps the naming isn't necessary anymore. The universe remembers its own language. It has always been whispering. We were the ones who spoke too loudly to hear it. Beneath the surface, rivers murmur through crystal channels, carrying fragments of iron and memory. Coral glows softly in distant seas. Forests of steel and bark sway with the rhythm of wind. Life moves everywhere in slow harmony, an orchestra conducted by time itself. What once was chaos has become cadence, every element finding its place in the long song of survival. Somewhere within that song lies the echo of our presence, not our monuments or machines, but the tenderness with which we once wondered. The awe that built telescopes, the care that carved stories, the love that tried imperfectly to preserve beauty. Those things did not die. They became part of the planet's pulse, woven into rain, folded into light. Humanity ended, but wonder did not. If you stand here in imagination, breathing with this world that outlived you, you might feel no grief at all. Only belonging. The silence is not absence, it is acceptance. You are both gone and present, dissolved into everything that remains. Each gust of wind carries a note of you. Each spark of starlight remembers your gaze. The earth hums a lullaby in languages older than time. Slow, soft, infinite. So rest now, the story has not ended, it has become quiet. The desert that used to be New York sleeps under starlight, its ruins turn to garden, its echoes to rhythm. Tomorrow will come, though no one will count it. The planet will keep singing low, patient, eternal. And somewhere in that endless hymn, the universe will whisper back, "You were here."